All right, we're going to call to order the Historic Preservation Board meeting for September 5th, 2023. First item up would be roll call. Ms. Kaufman?
Dan Courtney,
Here.
Vivian Tyler,
Here.
Phil Haight,
Here.
Liz Hawk,
Here.
Michelle Hazen, Savannah Partridge, Jay Reeves,
Here.
Bill Warner,
Here.
Bridget Murphy.
Here.
You have quorum.
Okay. Next item up would be approval of the minutes from August 1st, 23.
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Several seconds. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Next item up would be public comment for any item on the agenda that's not part of the public hearing already.
Mr. Chair,
Mhm.
I think that Parks is here to give you a brief update on the Thelma Bolton Center and kind of what's happening with that. And Pete.
Pete?
Don't forget to state your name, Pete.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, board members. My name is Peter McNeese. I work for the City of Gainesville in a program called Wild Spaces in Public Places, and I manage construction projects for the city. I had the opportunity to be at the joint City-County Commission meeting on August 28th. It was requested by the county that we give them an update on what's happening with the Thelma Bolton Center, because the county commission had received several letters complaining about the direction that the city was going and asking that they reconsider the decision to proceed with a partial demolition of the structure. And so for those of you who are new members to the board, what was eventually decided was that we would keep the two facades of the existing historic building that face the streets, and we would restore those, and we would demolish and rebuild the rest of the facility in the same architectural style and things like that. But at the time, I think that was kind of trying to find the least worst option. But now that people have had an opportunity to digest that and consider all the other alternatives, it is being questioned again. So I will save you from the the political ramifications of the county questioning what the city is doing and who has the authority to do that, because that became somewhat contentious. But the end result is that we had on the consent agenda for the September 7th meeting the approval of a $469,000 design proposal from Wanamaker Jensen Architects to proceed with that partial demolition, which is the direction that we asked them to go in. And some of our city commissioners decided that they would like to discuss this a little bit more. So Commissioner Eastman asked that it be taken off of the consent agenda, and that moved it to the September 21st City Commission meeting. So at the September 21st City Commission meeting, thank goodness Betsy will be in town that day so that she will be representing Wild Spaces, but they are going to bring that up for a reconsideration. And that's pretty much all we know at this time, other than there are obviously some very good arguments from all sides associated with this Thelma Bolton project. I've been at the city for almost 4 years now, and this has been an item that's been on my desk for all of that time while we've explored all the different options, and have so far spent about $250,000 to get to the point where we are now, which is not much further along than where we were about 4 years ago. But we do have to do something, and fairly soon, because the roof is currently being supported by scaffolding, and we didn't have water intrusion issues 6 months ago, but we are now starting to have water intrusion issues at the facility. And so my hope is that we get some clear direction from the City Commission on how to proceed at that September 21st meeting.
Okay. Does that conclude?
That concludes my brief synopsis of that meeting. It was, I I explained where we were, and then I let the commissioners kind of hash it out. Ultimately, Commissioner Ken Cornell from the county put forth a motion to ask the city to reconsider, and they passed that motion. Some of our city commissioners weren't overly thrilled with that, but it is going to be talked about. I don't know how receptive they are to those suggestions.
Okay. Does that mean your preliminary plans are on hold at this point?
Yes, we weren't proceeding, well, we were moving forward with creating construction documents, and the very first step would be to get a design proposal from Wanamaker Jensen Architects. Our original estimate for this project was $3 million. It ballooned to $5.5 million. We were very surprised that the cost of this design work was going to be close to another $500,000. That was much higher than what we expected. And so this is probably a good thing that we are reconsidering how to move forward. There were some other options on the table. If you remember, one of them was characterized as a Band-Aid approach, but just to fix up some of the deficiencies in the building now so that we could reopen the facility and start using it again. Some people felt like that was just kicking the can down the road, obviously, and they see that Wild Spaces has the opportunity to invest in that facility because we have the money to do it now, and so they felt like, well, maybe we should do it now, but there's no clear consensus on how to proceed.
Okay.
So excuse me.
Go ahead.
So the unreadiness is whether or not to proceed with the facade, keeping the facade in place, and then replacing whatever else needed. But it's not to demolish, it's to do something, but what to do in terms of just keeping it in one way or the other. Is that the unreadiness?
Well, ultimately they boiled all the different alternatives down to 4 options. One of which was a Band-Aid approach, just to get the facility reopened because it's been closed for almost 4 years now. And on the other end of the spectrum was a complete demolition and then rebuild an entire new facility that would match the architectural style and pay homage to the history of that and of that building and everything that that has happened there over the last 80 years. And then in between, there were 2 other options. One of which was to keep those 2 walls and then just rebuild the building. There are pros and cons to each of those. Like the facility is, right now, it's currently in a low spot on that site. And so it suffers from some water issues, which may have contributed to the condition that it's in now. It was built right at the start of World War II, so a lot of our materials, our building construction materials, were being sent to the war effort. So for example, there is no steel in the walls. So that's contributing to some of its deterioration. The footers are suspected to be undersized, which is why some of the walls themselves might be racking at this point. So, the building has, I think it's fair to say that the building has outlived its design life. At the time, they desperately needed meeting space for our service members. And I don't know if they intended it for it to last 80 years. I know it's surprising to some people that aren't in construction, but every building has a design life. And we do take historic preservation very seriously. We try to take the gems and preserve them and keep them in perpetuity. But it's a lot of money right now. It's a lot of money in an environment, a political environment, where they're struggling with how to manage the finances at the city of Gainesville. I mean, 150 positions were recently cut, 50 of which were occupied. So 50 people lost their jobs. So there's some taxpayer discontent with the thought of spending upwards of $6 million on something like this. So I don't know what they're going to do. I'm not a policy maker, of course, but we'll do the best we can with whatever direction we're given.
I sure hope we can save him. I am just not ashamed of saying that. I think historic preservation is so important, and obviously because I sit in a building, the Cotton Club Museum and Cultural Center, that was also built by the soldiers. So, and it does have a lot of history for Gainesville. So I know that's not up to you to decide.
No,
I just want to get the air out and stuff.
That is uncontested. We
Yeah,
all understand the historical significance of that building. Some people have raised concerns that we've got a hippodrome, the Hippodrome Theater, which we have kiddie pools in the attic collecting the water that's leaking from the roof and the gutters. At the Thelma Bolton Center, or at the Thomas Center where I work, we show up to work in the morning and find pieces of the clay tile roof that have fallen overnight and have shattered on the ground. So we've got a lot of our buildings are in need of attention, and that's a problem that's endemic in our country. It's not unique to Gainesville. We all struggle with how to best manage the funds that we have. But hopefully we can find a resolution or some sort of a direction that will will be the least offensive. It'll be a bitter pill no matter what we do, but something that people can live with.
Thank you.
Okay, so the situation now is we're still waiting for the commissioners to have another talk about it and for you guys to decide what direction. But if I understand correctly, the city commission's vote still stands.
That is correct.
Okay.
I think the city commission will ultimately have jurisdiction over this, although the county commission pointed out that they've been requested to participate in the funding of this project. And so I think the hint that they were saying is that their voice needs to be heard as well, or maybe they won't want to contribute that $1.5 million that's currently being discussed.
Okay, all right, so there's still some matters to be debated out. As you know, there has been a lot of controversy about this that's been kicked around at various meetings around town, and Ken Cornell is one of the issues. I went to a Matheson Center presentation, and a lot of this stems from the commission meeting. When you mentioned there were a lot of options presented, and one of the issues is that everybody was quite confused by what was presented because there were so many different options going on, and it ended up they voted on one that wasn't even one presented as it was. However, a lot of the controversy stems from Parks continual reference to the fact that the plan was to demolish the service wing, and rebuild it, which is correct. That is what we were presented, and the other charge at the historic board was to save the auditorium section, given the fact that the green room and the stage end would need to be rebuilt. But everybody seems to be referring to the fact only 2 walls would be saved. So that is where all this controversy is coming from. And that's not what we as a board approved. Unless I am quoting it wrong, we voted to save the auditorium section of the building, knowing that it was the stage end where the trusses have failed, that's where the walls are being pushed out, and that the rest of it could be rebuilt or reinforced and kept, because the auditorium was what we as a board set out to make sure that is saved, given the fact that there was the push for the service wing to be reconstructed. But what I'm going to all these meetings and hearing is that the city has decided that they're taking everything down but 2 walls. And that is not the way our COA reads.
Well, and it may be an oversimplification of
Yes.
the details of the COA on my part, but there is going to be a massive amount of reconstruction of that auditorium. The 2 facades that are facing the street are what we were focusing on, maintaining the historic character as much as possible. The roof is collapsing, whether or not...
One end of the roof is collapsing.
Right, but we've got pictures of all the trusses that are, span too far of a distance. I'm not a structural engineer, but we have a structural engineer report that says
I'm familiar with that.
This is trouble. And so we're just relying on the advice of our experts. It's not that we're opposed to doing work there. We were in the process of doing a renovation of that building to make some of those improvements that you discussed when we discovered that the roof was kind of caving in. It's another example of kind of demolition by neglect.
It's a very big example of demolition.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we want is we want the facility to be useful for our community.
Correct.
And for the user groups that are there. So, there are people, for example, that will talk about the flooring and how they really want the flooring to remain, but the dance groups are very unhappy with the flooring because it's a polyurethane floor like a basketball court, and they can't dance on it. They want what's called like a spring floor. And the people that would use the auditorium are not happy because they need more green room space and more back of house things so they can actually have productions there. And so nobody is more interested than me in finding a solution that makes as many people happy as possible.
Right.
Because what I would hate for the city of Gainesville and for the community at large is for us to make a significant investment in this facility and then end up in a product that nobody's really happy with. Because I think that would be a missed opportunity.
Well, yeah, I would agree with you, and I think that was one of our justifications for looking at and agreeing with the idea that the service wing could be rebuilt to serve the rest of the uses and the new functions you were going to put in the building and all that.
So, and I should add, for the benefit of people that are new to this discussion, our original direction was to demolish the building completely.
Correct.
The city commission voted unanimously to proceed in that direction, and it's only after, at least a year worth of advocacy on the part of the Historic Preservation Board and the community have they backed away from that position, and so we're trying
Correct.
to find some compromise. And my position as a city employee and a construction manager is not to be involved in the decision making, but to assist and try to provide you with accurate information. Mm-hmm. And that $469,000 design fee, for example, is information that the city commissioners did not have at the time,
Right.
and it may have influenced their decision making.
Are you only interviewing with one architectural firm at this point?
So we have a proposal from Wanamaker Jensen Architects. They are a company that we were using for the renovation of the building when we noticed the roof collapse. I have since reached out to Rick Gonzalez from REG Architects. He has a company that specializes in historic preservation, and we paid him to come up and do a very thorough, comprehensive study of the building to present us with some options about what he thought might be capable. And this is what he does. It's in his wheelhouse, and so we've reached out to him to say, would you consider putting together a cost proposal for us so that I can have that information to present to the city commissioners so that they can at least compare the two. Mm-hmm. His cost for doing a complete restoration has a very wide range because
Right.
in renovation projects like this, you don't really know what you're going to find once you take a wall down.
Correct.
But the high end was about $6.2 million.
Right.
But because it's his area of expertise, his design fees may be much less. A lot of the community has pointed out that there are other funding sources that may be available, which would help to pay off some of this very large price tag. So my hope is that we can all work together to find a good solution to this
Okay,
problem.
well, you've answered my question because, obviously we would be, given the fact it is potentially a, historic preservation project, renovation project in an extreme situation in this case, we're glad you have reached out to Rick to see if, he can at least give you another number, because I know the first firm, in the beginning, going through the renovations, we had some issues. They did eventually come back with solutions to the issues, but
Yep.
it wasn't as sensitive originally, the approach, as we were hoping it would have been.
But just so that there's no ambiguity, it's our intention to comply wholeheartedly with the certificate of appropriateness, word for word.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And was there anyone else? Yes.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to reiterate your thoughts because I've had several sort of conversations with citizens who know that I'm on the Historic Preservation Board, and they were looking at me with pretty offensive faces and was wanting to know what happened. And for me, it's very important that the community knows what we as a board voted on, and it was certainly, and it's not just sort of sort of misspeaking or like a misnomer. This is something that has been brought to my attention as well, this idea of just keeping 2 walls or 4 walls. So I just wanted to reiterate to the community that's not, what we all voted for.
Bill.
Thank you for your time.
I'm going to be very emphatic when I say that it would be a very serious loss to continue with Wanamaker by comparison to Rick Gonzalez. Wanamaker from day one did not display a grasp of historic preservation. The presentation was naive, to be very charitable. And Rick has a thorough understanding of the business. And if there's anybody that could bring us a solution that we can be happy with, it would be REG.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you.
First of all, as most people know, I'm still trying to save the entire building. The wing has more historic significance than the auditorium. Every single photo from the 1940s shows the wing. Also, the architects that's chosen should have experience with historic preservation. And I think the option given to the city on September 21st, that firm has no experience with historic preservation. So whether the entire building is saved or just two walls, I think it's critical that the firm knows how to restore the windows, how to take care of the brick, how to take care of the roof. And either way, whether it goes full restoration or just two walls, I think the option given to the city is not the correct one of choosing of that architect, since they have literally no experience with historic preservation.
Okay. Thank you. But as you heard, the selection hasn't been made yet. Okay. Anybody else from the audience?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I would just like to welcome, we have several, I think, UF students in the audience today. Dr. Stevenson's class, and I know a couple of other professors at University of Florida have noticed that we do really good work here. And so they're starting to assign our board meetings as assignments. So well,
great.
if you're from UF, welcome.
Thank you all for coming. Okay. Any other public comment for anything that's not on the agenda? Okay. Yes, yes, please.
Patrick, can I have the overhead, please? I'm switching. Chairman Reeves and the board, Pete McNeese again. I'd like to speak with you for 3 minutes, not in my professional capacity at the city of Gainesville, but as a resident of Gainesville and someone who lives in the historic University Heights neighborhood. There was about 2 years ago now, the Alpha Phi House that came before the board for approval, which is the construction of a sorority house in the University Heights neighborhood. And I wanted to give you a little bit of feedback because I think it will help with this process in the future. I regretted the loss of one of the historic contributing structures, but I do think they're going to be great neighbors. But I wanted to point out that there are some loopholes that I was hoping we could close. The first is that when you issue a certificate of appropriateness, you ask the developer to come back to the board if there are changes. And I'm not sure how often that happens. I know that with the Thelma Bolton Center, with the Alpha Phi House, specifically the rendering at the top is what they showed you when they requested a certificate of appropriateness, and there was a lot of pushback about the use of certain materials. If you look at the top and bottom, you'll see that they did not use brick on the stairs to any of the entrances like they said they would. They tripled the number of columns that were a very contentious point because that's not an architectural element that was consistent with the University Heights neighborhood. This is a close-up of the fact that instead of 2 columns, now they have 6 there holding it up. And you can see the steps a little bit better. They also showed the south elevation to be kind of this enclosed with all of the accessory equipment that was shielded from view, and what they went with instead was just a 6-foot fence around it, which very different visual appearance. And some of this stuff was just, I work in construction all the time. We're constantly value engineering things. We we have change orders that turn out to be more expensive than we thought, and therefore we have to cut corners elsewhere. But I point these things out just as an opportunity for the board to be more demanding of developers, that they do come back and discuss with you these changes. Actually, on this one too, you can notice that what they showed us, which was on top, was that center column with 6 windows, and they ended up deleting most of them and just putting 2 windows. So those are the types of things that really do change the character of the final product.
Agreed.
The second part of that certificate of occupancy was the relocation of some historic structures. I worked as the director of development for Trimark Property for 13 years, and during that time, I personally restored 6 single-family homes that were contributing structures in the University Heights Historic District. It's something for which I'm very proud, but I didn't realize that I was just working in a very good environment. John Fleming, the owner of that company, had a real interest in that, and so he made sure that once we moved a building, we fixed it up, we made it better than it was when we found it, and we really did restore it to its original grandeur. The same cannot be said about what happened at the Alpha Phi property. They moved 2 historic single-family homes, and they have been just left in disrepair. They've had no power for 2 years. The process of moving a house is very destructive to a home. It causes all kinds of damage. Things like, broken windows that were historic. That's the side of one of the houses where you can see it's separated from the building itself. These were homes that were occupied prior to them moving them. So students were in these houses until they vacated to make room for this construction. This is what the house looks like now on the inside. I was terrified at first that they were going to try to move residents in for the fall season, but it looks like they're hoping to do something in the future. But in the meantime, this is how the property sits. Open doors with strange people coming in and out of the facility. I don't know if there are people who are struggling with housing that are probably squatting there at the time, but it's falling into disrepair, and this is just accelerating the demolition of these buildings, or the demolition by neglect that we talked about. So they're really, you might be able in the future to approve these things with a condition that they have to make. I think it said they have to make some repairs to the damage that occurred, but when they're asking for favors, they're willing to agree to anything, and they would hopefully agree to restoring the buildings after the relocation.
The house moving ordinance, it was revised years ago to say that the buildings had to be moved, and when they were moved, that they had to be brought up to current code, meaning electrical, plumbing, everything, all the inefficiencies, or not inefficiencies, but the deficiencies had to be corrected. They had to be restored, essentially, is what the house moving ordinance says. So right now, we have a code enforcement issue, basically, and I thank you for bringing that to us, because the city needs to go after them.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to provide some feedback.
Pete,
Yeah.
can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
Since you're here just as a resident, what is your personal opinion on what we should do with the Selma Bolton Center, knowing that we received an engineering layout, a report on how to repair Selma Bolton? Do you think we should try to fix it, or do you think we should try to start again?
Well, I think that there's a lot of very strong arguments to be made on all sides. I mean, even the community members, the dance groups and stuff that are telling us that they need more space in the auditorium, or the people that say they like the wing, but there's support columns in the middle that break up the spaces and it limits the ability for them to use it.
But I mean, speaking to a preservation board, I mean, we preserve properties, not dance venues, just for the building itself.
Well, I don't think I'm prepared to answer that, because I'm weighing the considerations of, even though I'm here as a resident, I live across the street from Alpha Phi in a historic house that I restored, so I consider myself a pretty good example of someone who's kind of put his money where his mouth is, you know, spent a big chunk of my life savings restoring my own house. It's 100 years old. So I'm definitely an advocate for historic preservation. But in this case, I'm at the mercy of what our Parks and Recreation Director and the City Commission direct me to do, regardless of how I feel about it.
Appreciate your honesty.
Yeah.
Yes, Bill.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for taking the time to inform us on this condition in University Heights.
Yeah. The situation with the building changing during construction, it should be the building department that should notify staff and let them know when things don't match up with the COA, because they are looked at. Usually that's how it used to happen quite a long time ago, but it hasn't happened in a number of years, I'm sure.
And because I work in construction, I know that the building department may not even be well informed. If I go from 6 windows to 2 windows in one part of the building, that's not the type of change that I would even consider important unless I was operating under a certificate of occupancy. And maybe it had been made clear to me that any exterior changes were subject to.
However, the inspectors are to see that it follows the plans unless there are corrected plans. If there are corrected plans, it would have had to go through the building department for changes, unless it's just something that's red marked in the field. And yeah,
There's a lot of redlining that goes on.
there is, unfortunately, and this is something that needs to be addressed. I
And
appreciate
maybe
you bringing
in
it.
their defense, maybe they didn't fully understand that elements that impact the historical appearance of the new building should be brought back to your attention.
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
I don't know when those plans went through. It was
Before
It
you.
was before me, but even in the 2 years I've been here, our department has gone through so many changes with actual software that we now use. So, for example, historic preservation is one of the departments that has to sign off on building plans. And so it would have been my job to make sure they matched what was approved by.
Yeah, I thought nowadays it does go to you, but I don't think it did a few years back.
Right, so hopefully that resolves it, but that doesn't mean they should just be let off the hook. I mean, definitely, we can go after them for demolition by neglect on the other 2 structures.
Yeah, and I don't think, in my experience, and I've been working in construction my whole life, switching from brick stairs to concrete stairs is not something that the inspector would even concern themselves with. It doesn't relate to a building code issue, which is what they're there to inspect and enforce.
Understand.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. All right, if there's nothing else, that concludes public comment, and that brings us to the public hearing portion of the meeting. Okay.
If you are going to be speaking on behalf of the only public hearing item for today, can you please stand and raise your right hand? Do you promise that the testimony you're about to provide the Historic Preservation Board today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Perfect. This is public hearing 1, COA 23-000079. The address is 1028 Northeast 5th Street. This is in the Duck Pond Northeast Historic District. It is a non-contributing structure built in 1972. This is an application for the installation of all new windows on the house. The current windows, as you can see from the photos provided, are aluminum 8/8 single hung sash. The proposed windows are vinyl 1/1 double hung sash. And that is why this became a board item, because it's a change in material and typology. There is no Florida Master Site File form for this property that was built in 1972. The home features a front gable roof with horizontal eave boards, an exterior side brick chimney, and brick walls. The entrance is within a recessed front porch. The owner wanted to use PGT windows, but they did not offer windows in the sizes that are existing. She would have had to have actually changed the window opening size to accommodate those windows. In order to customize window size, the owner had to select the 6500 series in the double hung windows offered by Simonton. Though vinyl, this is a much higher quality window than the typical inexpensive single hung vinyl sash that we occasionally are asked to review. The Historic Preservation, Rehabilitation, and Design Guidelines serve as a supplement to the Land Development Code, Section 30-112. The recommended guidelines for alterations are for projects that seek to replace or repair historic windows. So this is not really that case. This is a non-contributing structure, and we have a lack of documentation and physical evidence, and we do not know what the original windows were if they differed from the current window. However, some of the not recommended parts of your guidelines can be utilized in evaluating this project. So what is not recommended is changing the location or size of the windows or other openings that alter the architectural and historic character of the building. This proposed project is not changing the size of any window openings. What is not recommended? Replacing window features on significant facades with historically and architecturally incompatible materials, such as anodized aluminum, mirrored, or tinted glass. The proposed project is not utilizing mirrored or tinted glass, but it is requesting vinyl as the window material, which is not a material used historically. However, this is a non-contributing structure and therefore is not held to the same standard as the historic resources within the district. Another not recommended piece of the guideline. Removing window features that can be repaired where such features contribute to the historic and architectural character of a building. The proposed project is not removing any window features that would be considered contributing to the historic character of the building. Changing the size or arrangement of window panes, muntins, and rails where they contribute to the architectural and historic character of a building is also not recommended. The new windows proposed will not have muntins, and they will be 1/1 instead of the current 8/8. Since this is a non-contributing structure, technically there is no impact to a historic building. When we talk about the applicable federal guidelines, the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation are to be applied to historic rehabilitation projects and do not generally apply for non-contributing structures. Though there are some cases where it is warranted, for instance, if a project were going to be removing work or materials that would uncover an original structure, but this is not a project type that requires federal standard review. Staff recommends that application COA 23-000079 be approved.
Okay. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I mean, if you guys want those, they're called munions or?
Muttons.
Muttons. If you want them, I don't mind putting
Yeah.
those in.
It'd be cleaner without them.
And they would be fake anyway, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably cleaner to not
Can you
have them.
just state your name for the record, please?
Anne Marie Doyle.
Okay. Any comments from the board?
Yeah, I think that your approach is a sensitive one, taking the extra time to look into that which would not either create fill-ins in the sides or, worse than that, cutting the openings. Whereas we do not characteristically approve vinyl, a large part of that has been the examples before us have been so lacking. And while this would be ultimately would move that this be noted as a unique application, I think this is a good example.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
And I just forgot to mention to you, I did add as your Exhibit 4 at the end of the packet, I actually went to the window company's website and researched all the various types of windows that they do offer in single hung and double hung. And circled is the ones she's selecting, and it's really one of the
Best, yeah.
higher end vinyl windows available on the market.
Thank you. Okay. Would somebody like to make a motion?
Well, move to approve, let's see, you have a number on this?
Right here.
Oh, it's up here, right. COA, 23-00079, noting that this is a unique approval to this particular location. That's it.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimous.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Additional board business?
So you were supposed to have an update on 735 East University Avenue. I was just looking to see if there was, because as you know, last month we got a very late update, but I don't see one. I had requested an update about a week ago on this.
Mr. Warner would like to add something about that.
I've come to observe that the owner of the property is elected to try to move the mess they've made onto a buyer of the property. It was about 2 weeks ago. It was listed, and in the disclosure, they have made the notation, GC that performed repairs did not get appropriate permits or historic committee approval for repairs completed. Some repairs will need to be completed to satisfy the City of Gainesville Historic Committee. Well, there's a lot more to it than that. That is an inadequate disclosure, in my opinion. And I think the applicant has displayed no good faith or tangible effort to remedy the problems they've created, and that we should move forward with sanctions through the process of doing so.
Is that your motion?
Yeah, I move to sanction the applicant in this instance to, we had given them 90 days to have demonstrated tangible progress. They have not done so. They have failed. And that there is no reason to put off sanctioning that behavior. So I move to direct this to code enforcement or whatever the procedure is to set a per day fine for lack of compliance. For the record, I would remind everyone that in sworn testimony before this board, the entity that was doing the work identified conditions that, in their opinion, should not have been covered up, but they were required to. So I think it's a mess, and they need to clean it up. So, my motion is send it to code enforcement for.
Second.
Okay. You want to do a roll call?
Sure. Nathaniel Courtney,
Aye.
Vivian Filer,
Aye.
Bill Haight,
Aye.
Liz Hawk,
Aye.
Savannah Partridge, Jay Reeves,
Aye.
Bill Warner.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Warner.
Perfect. And the only other thing I wanted to tell you on board business is an update on the metal roof item that you all deliberated long and hard over and had a very thorough and thoughtful discussion at this, at that board meeting where you passed the new guidelines for metal roofs. And I just wanted you all to know, people are noticing. I've had other preservation programs calling us, calling me, asking us to send them that language, and because they have seen how that's been very effective. I was a little worried we would have this just slew of metal roof applications all of a sudden, and it's really about even with the metal versus the shingle. But other preservation boards, including Micanopy and Ocala, have taken notice, and you are to be commended for that, because people are seeing that this preservation board is trying to find solutions. And that's not always the case with some preservation boards. We're being seen as trying to reach out and work with the community members in a way to offer them something that they need, but still respects the historic integrity of the structure. So kudos to you.
Thank you. Okay. Next item would be member comments. Anyone?
Well, we have someone who's been missing for a few months is finally back. Bridget Murphy is back from her preservation work in Nantucket, and she actually said to me, "Hey, do you think it'd be okay if I presented to the board this PowerPoint about what I experienced there?" And I said, "Absolutely."
Oh, yes.
So take it away, Bridget.
Thank you for the introduction on that.
State your name, just,
I am Bridget Murphy.
There you
My
go.
address as well, or just.
no, it's all right.
So yeah, I thought it would be nice to put together a presentation to show you what I've been doing all summer long, why I haven't been here. So sort of how do I use the clicker?
Just start pointing it somewhere. See if it works.
Okay. Things shifted a bit, so that makes me worry for the rest of the PowerPoint. But so our topic for this summer in the PIN program was looking at the historic and current challenges with worker housing on Nantucket. We were there from June 10th to August 9th. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Patrick.
So we were in Nantucket for about 2 months-ish, and we looked at worker housing specifically and how that played into where people living on an island where it's incredibly difficult to make enough money to live in a very expensive area, and considering the entire island is a historic district, everything is very expensive. It's very hard to even just repair and maintain your home. So who went? 3 of us came from the University of Florida, one of whom is also here. Caleb came. And we had students from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. We had one student from Rensselaer Polytech Institute and from Randolph-Macon College. And here's a group photo of us at the end with Erica Mullen and Dr. Claire Larkin. And so what did we work on while we were there? So we had a couple projects that we worked on, but the first thing that we really focused on as a group was our census research, where we focused on what was the worker neighborhood more so of where do people live if they're not ship captains or if they're not in the whaling and oil industry. This is the normal people who make the town function similar to today. And so we each took a street, we split it up, and getting to do this research was pretty cool because one of the houses that we visited and we got to meet and work with one of the architects who was restoring it was the Higginbotham house. And that was on my street. And talking with her, she was saying how it's really difficult to find ways to restore the interior of the house and how to present it because they don't have super great records for the inside of the house. And they also didn't have great records for the outside landscaping. And so I asked if Florence Higginbotham was a painter, as it said here in the census, I believe it's from the 1950s, then perhaps her paintings, since at the time she was wheelchair bound, reflected what was in her backyard. And the architect had never known that she was a painter, so she said that was super interesting, and now she's going to try and find some of her paintings, so maybe they could try and re-landscape the property. And so for our personal individual projects, I chose looking at Nantucket's transportation. I looked at how historically the streets were, just going from carriages and small foot travels to having to support Jeeps and Range Rovers and Land Rovers and everything in between that people drive around on the island. We all made a story map to sort of convey this information and put it online. And so this is available on the PIN website. And so mostly what we did was site visits and tours to a ton of these properties around Nantucket. It's not a huge island. I think it's 14 miles wide, but I feel like we covered every inch of it. So just clicking through to give you a very brief, because we went all over. One of the places we went was the old jail. Yes, it is spelled like that, and it is from 1805. We went and visited the old mill, which is still grinding corn to this day. That was built in 1746. We went to the oldest house, which was the coffin house. It's been restored a ton of times. I think at one point it was struck by lightning and either completely burned down or mostly burned down. And that was built in 1618. And one of the coolest places I think we got to go, I think I have two in here. One of the first one was the First Congregationalist, which was built in 1725. There are many denominational churches on the island. We were able to go inside the church and go all the way up to the steeple where we could go see the bell, and we were climbing around all the way up, and it got very, very drafty and extremely windy. If you really feel the wind coming through those wooden slats, the higher you go. So that was really cool getting to see the island from such a high up. I think you can see just how tall you go all the way up to that little window in the top. And then we also took a lot of house tours of both people's personal homes and of the Mariah Mitchell house where she had lived. She was the first woman astronomer. I think we found the Halley's Comet, I believe. She found a comet. But we toured this one house. I think it was from 1740s sometime. I remember it was pre-Revolutionary War. It was really amazing to see a lot of these details that just completely make it so period-centric that you start to see themed in a lot of these houses. These extremely vertical stairways that they have a rope here as you would climb because it is so steep as you go up. And this is true in a lot of the houses because there was just no room and limited resources to have a giant staircase. You can see here in the bathroom, a lot of the floors had giant widened floor planks because it wasn't that expensive and it was cheaper to move one big plank instead of a lot of little ones at the time. And in the top corner, it's really small, but since it was mid-1700s, it was during I thought it looked very Pirates of the Caribbean-esque, which is sort of right for the time. And it's actually an old padlock with a key that you can take out, and it's a big metal key. And I thought that was so cool that they still have all down to the little details of what this house was in the 1700s. And so the last place I think I have on here is Sconset, which is another town on the island besides the main downtown area. One of the things I wanted to point out in this photo was architecturally, because it's an island, they had to continuously add on to all of the buildings, which I thought was really cool. And you can see within each addition of the building how it juts out or it changed the general shape or the slope and how they have to account for the snow sliding off, which this is in Massachusetts. I don't know anything about snow. So there was a lot for me to unpack with that. But we were able to go and walk around in the Codfish Park area, which is the photo on the right-hand side and just generally look at more of the architecture in Sconset, where I think the houses here were a little bit smaller, though it doesn't really come across with the one giant one I chose. But this was supposed to be the smaller fishing villages where the general crew would live. We also got to go into this really old barn. I don't have a date for this one because it was a last minute thing. A property owner was like, do you want to come look at my barn? Because the contractor who was giving us a tour was working on remodeling it to turn it into housing to function as a mother-in-law suite. So we got to go in and see how they are going to turn this into a livable, very nice space from what was once a barn, which a lot of the houses on Nantucket were formerly barns. And how they make use of the details being on an island and relying on the tradesmen who either have to live there and get paid a lot or come in on ferry each day was really, really interesting. You can see, working from left to right, the bullseye glass windows, which were originally probably cheaper historically, but now are more artisan and brought in to mimic that old historic feel of the island. The second photo there of the chandelier, that's in the First Congregationalist Church, and it's actually painted onto the ceiling. That's not plaster work because it was difficult to come across perhaps plaster tradesmen at the time, but a painter could also suffice. I have in here the shingle cedars, the cedar shingles, super common in New England, but on Nantucket, the historic guidelines of the district, every house has to have the cedar shingles and they can't be a faux material or have some sort of imitation, which comes into question the sustainability of it because you have to import all of the wood from Canada. And then the last one I have here was the beamwork in a lot of these buildings was very wonky and interesting. That's the corner of a room, and without putting the entire photo on there to save space, I just included it. They reused a lot of the parts from the whaling ships. So because wood was a hot commodity and it was really difficult to come by unless it was imported, so it was already there, they'd re-scrap it and they can use it. And you can see how with the plaster curving down the way and the way that the corners all went, it's really interesting. You can just tell that a lot of this stuff, they had to get creative with it. And on a similar notion of bringing it back home, how they are going about preserving a lot of the structures on their island, I think it would have been great if we could have seen more of the physical work, but I think that just wasn't in the cards this year. Very similar to what they're doing in St. Augustine. I know UF also has the PISA program. Pretty much the general solution is either move the house or raise it up extremely high. But you can see in the photo on the right that the island is suffering from major erosion issues. That's probably the biggest escarpment that I've seen in my entire life. And so it becomes an issue of, do we just keep moving the houses back? On the island, they've moved one of the lighthouses a few hundred feet, just picked it up and moved it back to save it from falling off and into the ocean. And I think that what the challenges they face here are very telling of what could be happening in Florida in the coming decades. So I just thought that stuff was interesting. I did preservation all summer long, and I didn't talk to any of you. So I thought it'd be cool if I could kind of close that gap and show you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Great.
What is the ethnic makeup of the island?
I think the ethnic makeup is interesting because you have to think of it in the sense of year-round people and then seasonal. I think year-round it's mostly a white demographic, but for the most part there's also a huge, it is a very, very diverse place. I'm trying to think specifically. There's a very big Caribbean influence on there because going back hundreds and hundreds of years, the whaling ships went all over the world. They would frequently make trips all the way to Hawaii. They'd go down to the tip of Africa. They would go all over, and in doing so, they would, I think the Eros in Portugal, very big Portuguese influence as well in Nantucket. And seasonally, they have J1 visa workers come in, and so every few years it'll change, and whatever group is most suited or however it happens in the visa world. But the J1 visa workers from this seasonal summer peak they were all from Bulgaria. So there was a huge Eastern European influence this summer, and you really come across, I think, it's a very, very mixed and diverse place.
Were there any African Americans in that whole living area that you have shown us?
Yes, that was actually the point of the census on New Guinea, was to go and try and figure out. It was a historically black neighborhood, and so the purpose of our census was to go back through and see where were people of color or other minorities or people who just weren't flat out white because of that influence from the whaling industry. Where were they living? And so going through the records, we found the beginnings of, we could only get back to around I think we got back to either 1890 or 1900. And we just started to see the tail signs of that black population, like they were there, it says in the records, where they were and where they lived. Especially Florence Higginbotham, she was a African-American house owner, and she had tenants that lived with her. And so figuring out where these people lived was the point of our assignment, to show that they were here, they were working on the island, and the people who are there today are their descendants.
Very good.
If I may add, Mrs. Fowler, I believe there's a book entitled The Other Brahmins, and it talks about the African American influence in Boston, but as well as in Massachusetts on Nantucket. Yeah, great stuff. That was an excellent presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much, Bridget. I only have one more member staff comment. If you maybe helped me pick up the nameplates last week, you notice we're missing half of them. So if anybody knows where our nameplates have gone, maybe check your car.
Okay.
Well, I wasn't here thinking, because I don't have to check my car.
That's all I have.
Okay. All right, next meeting date, October 3rd, 2023. We stand adjourned.